Well, that was fast. Max Holloway pulled out of his fight with Alexander Volkanovski. This had to have been the fastest canceled fight of all time. A good 24 hours from when it was announced. I don't think the battle agreements were actually signed, but they announced the fight that was going to happen. 24 hours later, it gets canceled. And now the sweepstakes start. There's various fighters putting their name in the hat to fight Volkanovski on March 5th. There's a few fighters that make sense to fight for the featherweight belt if they're not going to reschedule Max Holloway versus Volkanovski. We don't know how bad this injury was, but we do know that Holloway re-injured himself of something that happened in the past. So the name a lot of people are throwing out there is the Korean Zombie. He's number 4 in the rankings. He's come out of a win against Dan Ige. Of the available top 5 fighters, he's the only guy coming off a win. Ortega's coming off a loss to Volkanovski. Yair's coming off a loss to Max Holloway. And Kelvin Kattar's coming off a loss to Max Holloway as well. Not only that, this would be an entertaining fight, one of the most powerful fights of the featherweight division. A knockout from either side is very likely to happen. Out of all the fights that can happen with Volkanovski right now, this one I believe is the most entertaining. There is something going against Korean Zombie that can favor Yair Rodriguez, and that is Yair knocked out Korean Zombie already. And yes, Yair did lose to Holloway, but is that going to take away Yair's chances at fighting for a belt, knowing how well he did against Holloway? The other thing is, Korean Zombie also lost to Brian Ortega 2 fights ago, and it wasn't as competitive as Yair versus Max. So there is a possibility for Yair Rodriguez to use his leverage and say, hey, I already beat Korean Zombie, and he already lost to Ortega, and I had a great fight with Max. Put me in there with Volkanovski, and this fight would be intriguing. The flashiness of Yair is something that Volkanovski is not used to fighting in the UFC. He hasn't really fought a guy who isn't about the fundamentals. When you look at Chad Mendes, when you look at Jose Aldo, when you look at Max Holloway, when you look at Brian Ortega, these guys are trying to fight by the fundamentals for the most part. Yair is a completely different kind of thing. Guys like Yair, Zabit, Giga Shikaze a little bit, even Edson Barboza, these guys are a bit different. And those are the kind of styles that Volk hasn't fought yet. So it would be something interesting to see for Volkanovski dealing with the flashy kicks, with the unexpected elbows, with the jumping techniques and stuff like that. But at the same time, as you saw in the Holloway fight, Yair is getting much better with the fundamentals as well, using his basic Muay Thai skills, basic boxing skills, putting together combinations with a mix of his Taekwondo kicks. This would be fascinating. But I ultimately do think that Yair would be an easier fight for Volk than Korean Zombie would. Korean Zombie, I believe, is a harder fight, given that Yair can be taken down and held down by Volkanovski. To go with that, even though Yair is a flashy striker, he's a lot better with the fundamentals these days, he's way more technical than he's ever been before, he's going to run into some problems with Volkanovski there as well. So there's a lot of areas in that fight where Volkanovski is going to have an advantage or stalemate it. Whereas for Korean Zombie, it's not necessarily the same kind of thing. Volk does not want to stay on the ground too long with the Korean Zombie. Even on the feet, he could get knocked out any given moment. Volkanovski's counter right uppercut, just like Max landed on Volkanovski, can be there for Korean Zombie as well, but KZ has way more power. So those are the 2 featherweights that make any kind of sense right now to fight Volkanovski. There is the Giga Shikaze route if he goes and beats Kelvin Kattar next week, but how likely is Shikaze ready to go into a title fight less than 2 months later? Now with the featherweights aside, there is one other name, and it's something I've talked about before. He just put his name in the hat again, he's calling out Volkanovski, and he's getting a lot of attention for it. Henry Cejudo. This happened before and it made sense. They could have done Volkanovski versus Cejudo before. It seemed like Dana wasn't really up to it, but the fact that now it's another pullout, it's making it seem like, man, maybe it's meant to be. Maybe Cejudo versus Volkanovski is supposed to happen. I don't think any fan would be upset at this kind of fight, given that no one else in that division right now deserves a title shot besides Holloway. I think Korean Zombie, Yair Rodriguez, Giga Shikaze, I think they all need another win before they get a title shot, which means that they should all fight each other. With Zabit coming back, he gets thrown in there as well. Now there's like a mini tournament going on. In the meantime, while the featherweights figure this all out, while Holloway tries to come back from his injury, let's just do it, man. Let's do Henry Cejudo versus Alexander Volkanovski. Let's give Cejudo a chance to become the first UFC triple champ. The fans will love the fight. I don't think any fan would be upset at this. Volkanovski even said he's up for it. And of course Cejudo wants it. Everybody wants it. If they do make this happen, the UFC is going to run the risk of having their featherweight champion, the number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, lose his belt to a guy that's going to retire with the belt right afterward. If Cejudo gets the fight, and he beats Volkanovski, I don't see him staying around that much longer. He's probably going to retire immediately afterward, one of the greatest fighters of all time, one of the biggest accomplishments in UFC history, becoming the first 3-division champion, while also having the greatest 5-fight win streak in MMA history. Demetrius Johnson, TJ Dillashaw, Marlon Moraes, Dominic Cruz, Alexander Volkanovski, there is not a list like that you've ever seen in the sport. After doing that, he retires again, and the UFC never had an opportunity to use that guy. There's a lot of risk for that. Honestly, the UFC might just want to wait this out, wait for Holloway to come back, or just throw in Korean Zombie or Yair or something like that. But man, we want to see Cejudo in there. We want to see what he can do, because stylistically, this is a very doable fight for Cejudo. A lot of people are writing him out. Yes, he's much smaller, but at the same time, his wrestling skills are going to be a factor in this one. Volkanovski is going to have to respect the takedowns. Cejudo is much faster. He has knockout power. He's not going to be drained making that cut at all. And honestly, what Volkanovski's going to have to do is fight as the longer fighter, fight as the bigger guy in there. Keep the jab on Cejudo all day, move around the cage, do something that he's not normally used to doing, right? Volkanovski is usually the shorter fighter, so he doesn't have to use his reach advantage to win fights. He has to get inside on opponents, throw leg kicks from a distance to enter with overhand rights and left hooks. But against Cejudo, it's going to be a complete reverse. He's going to have to stick behind a jab, try to counter Cejudo as he makes his way in, because the worst thing for Volkanovski to do is engage with Cejudo head to head. Where Cejudo seems to be the more precise puncher, he's much faster with his movements and on the trigger, and every engagement is an opportunity for Cejudo to take Volkanovski to the ground. So out of all the fights that can happen right now, I want to see Cejudo versus Volkanovski. I would like to see Yair go and fight Korean Zombie again, have that rematch. Their first fight was spectacular. Have the winner of Giga Chikadze and Kelvin Kattar go and fight Brian Ortega, maybe as Holloway makes his return, however long that's going to be. If he's out for a long time, I'd like to see him fight Zabit or something, but if he's not going to be that much longer, he would deserve an immediate title shot no matter what happens with the belt next. So this is some interesting news. There's a few opponents they could go to. I have a feeling they might go with the Korean Zombie, but man, I want to see greatness. I want to see Cejudo fight again.